So she is an amazing woman. She toured all over Ireland with her plays in the lead up to the referendum, having conversations with people, and did something that I think that nobody, I think even including Eva herself, thought was going to happen. So yeah, to Eva.
It's funny just there when everyone clapped. It reminded me of the night that the exit polls came out. We didn't think we would find out so early that it passed. And I was just in the pub with my boyfriend and his friends. So like I thought I would be with my friends, you know, for this big moment. And everyone I had campaigned with. And I was just crying in the pub. And my boyfriend's friend was just like awkwardly looking into his Guinness. And he was like, well done. And I was like, yeah, because I single-handedly repealed the Eighth. Anyway, so I'm just going to chat, I guess, for 10 minutes about the campaign a bit. Oh, there it goes. On the 25th of May 2018, Ireland voted to repeal the Eighth Amendment. The referendum was won by a comprehensive and to many surprising 66% to 33%, roughly. It was one of the most important days in Irish history. The Yes campaign was energetic, determined and resourceful. It galvanised Irish people from all classes, all walks of life. It was the most exciting political movement Ireland had ever seen, and I still can't quite believe that it happened. The Eighth Amendment was a clause which was inserted into the Irish Constitution in 1983. It basically asserted that the unborn child had an equal right to life as that of the mother. The referendum in '83 came in the wake of the Roe versus Wade verdict in the US, which allowed for the introduction of less restrictive abortion regimes, and Irish politicians and the Catholic Church were essentially afraid that the same thing would happen in Ireland. I know a lot of the women who campaigned against the insertion of the Eighth in 1983, brilliant and radical women such as Alva Smith, who spearheaded the Together for Yes campaign. Those women were fighting a losing battle back in '83, and yet they fought. They were chased down streets as they door knocked. They had their fingers broken when doors were shut on their hands. They had dogs set on them. They were called witches. Campaigning this time round was substantially less traumatic, but certainly not a wholly pleasant experience. It was a bitterly divisive campaign. The No side had horribly graphic license to kill posters on what felt like every lamppost in the country. They plastered pictures of babies with Down syndrome on billboards everywhere with captions claiming that 90% of babies with the condition in Britain are aborted. This was despite repeated objections from Down Syndrome Ireland. For many women who had travelled in secret, who had told no one about their past abortions, who had to go abroad to terminate pregnancies because of fatal fetal abnormalities, for women who were raped, for women who couldn't afford to seek abortions in the first place, the No campaign was both offensive and at times traumatic. Meanwhile, the Together for Yes campaign, who had substantially less money to play with, did everything they could to keep the campaign as fact-based and positive as possible, to fight the fake news and to spread the clear and simple message that we have to trust women. They did an incredible job, in particular, of mobilising the youth across Ireland in both cities and in rural areas, and this played a massive part in securing a Yes victory. I went door to door with a 17-year-old boy who couldn't even vote because he wasn't old enough, but he had helped to get all his mates in school registered. We learned from marriage equality in 2015 that there was a real appetite for change, that backwards Catholic Ireland was slowly but surely dying a death, that a new Ireland was emerging, one in which women and minorities finally were being given a voice. The vote on the 25th of May confirmed this. As an artist and an activist who came out about my abortion, I received a lot of abuse on Twitter in the form of graphic, chopped up baby images. I was shouted at in the street when I was leafleting. I was called baby killer for wearing a Yes badge. But from the get-go, this time round, there was a sense that we were standing on the shoulders of giants, giant women, and that the time had finally come for Ireland to shake off the shackles of shame and pain that were largely inflicted by the Catholic Church in the 80s, and finally we would grant women bodily autonomy. The time had come to recognise that the Eighth Amendment had for so long punished its poorest, most vulnerable, most marginalised people, and the tide was turning. The death of Savita Halappanavar in 2012 was a massive catalyst for repealing the 8th. There was mass outcry when Savita, an Indian dentist living in Ireland, died in a hospital in Galway when she was denied what would have been a life-saving abortion. But while Savita's case was what most recently galvanised the country into political action, there were many, many more. There was the infamous X case of the 14-year-old girl who sought an abortion after she'd been raped and became pregnant. The courts imposed a travel ban on her, which the Supreme Court later overturned because of her suicide risk. The girl had a miscarriage before she was able to travel to have the pregnancy terminated. There was also Miss D, a teenager in 2007 who knew her baby wouldn't live outside the womb. The HSE, or NHS, attempted to stop her going to England for an abortion, falsely telling her that they had a court order preventing her from travelling and reporting her to the police. There was the Miss Y case in 2014, an asylum seeker who was denied an abortion despite being suicidal and was force-fed and forced to carry the pregnancy to term. That was in 2014 in Ireland. The list goes on. Ireland's past is dark. It is rife with injustices against women, and mostly we prefer not to talk about it. That's why we were all quite nervous about campaigning. I was touring my play, Maz and Bricks, in the months running up to the referendum, and after the performances, we had post-show discussions. And then on evenings off and weekends, I, like most other women I knew, just scampered door to door, desperately doing whatever I could. I anticipated a backlash, both in the theatre and on doorsteps. But as I travelled and performed in 14 different counties around Ireland in the months leading up to the vote, I was struck by people's willingness and eagerness to talk. Many people had stories to tell. Women in their 70s who were too poor to travel back in the day, who had had backstreet abortions. Women who had given up babies for adoption. Women who were in tears as they spoke for their first time about their experiences. The majority of men I met were either tentative yes voters, wholly on side, or said they wouldn't be voting because it wasn't for them to say. One taxi driver saw me wearing my repeal jumper and asked me for a chat, saying that he was confused by all the hype. He said his daughter was always on at him to vote yes, but he really wasn't sure. By the end of the journey, he told me that he probably would vote yes. I always reminded people, or at least tried to, that they didn't have to decide on anything. By voting yes, they were putting the choice in the hands of the people concerned. As we campaigned, it also emerged that people wanted to chat. They wanted a sounding board. They wanted facts. A lot of people were undecided and conflicted. It was an extremely emotive issue. We all know what it's like when a country is gripped by referendum fever. On the radio, on the television, when all anyone is talking about, it can be alienating and confusing. We're all also aware that it's often people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds that are locked out of debates. And the repeal movement was, at times, viewed as elitist and middle class and even described as urban chic. The iconic black repeal jumpers, which undoubtedly were integral in sparking a debate around repeal and spreading the message of choice, were nonetheless sometimes seen as being an elitist Trinity College fashion statement. Lynn Rowan, a brilliant and progressive independent senator in Ireland, talked about being pro-life as a young working class person. She said, "I received no education on the topic, or even an explanation of why or how, or most importantly, the women involved. I was anti-choice. Of course I was. I had nothing to challenge my belief, no insight into or information about the other side of the debate. I didn't want to be a baby murderer, and I didn't want any other women to be that either." And that was that. So many Irish people in the years gone by had little or no access to the facts, to the reality of unsafe backstreet abortions, to how the lack of reproductive rights was destroying people's lives. My mum was raised a strict Catholic in a family from a rural farming background. She later became an evangelical Christian. She attempted to talk me out of having an abortion, and she voted yes. The referendum politicized her, it educated her, it made her realize the importance of solidarity with other women, of having compassion with people on the lowest rungs of society. Ireland's lowest social classes were always the ones most severely punished by the 8th. Most middle-class women had the option to travel. Yes, they had to lie to their families and their employers because of the stigma and shame. Yes, they bled out on planes on the way home, but practically, for most middle-class women, abortion services abroad were probably as accessible to them as they were for rural women in Scotland or in the remote valleys of Wales. Those who suffered most on the 8th are women who couldn't afford the ferry or the plane or the cost of an abortion, which can be from anything from €500 to €2,000. Abortion Support Network is an organisation which offers financial and practical support to women travelling from Ireland and the Isle of Man to seek abortions. It provides non-judgmental advice and financial assistance to women in crisis. Mara Clark, who runs Abortion Support Network and is considered a repeal hero in Ireland, states, because when faced with an unwanted pregnancy, women with money have options and women without money have babies or do dangerous and desperate things. When I was campaigning in Ballymun, a working class area in Dublin, one woman said to me, of course it will pass here. We know that life isn't perfect. We know that shit things happen. We're compassionate people. And she was right. The result reflected this. When you look at the breakdown, every county in Ireland, apart from Donegal, voted majority for repeal. And as journalist Una Mullally pointed out, had there been ballot boxes in Perth, Australia, where so many young people go to find work from Donegal, then Donegal too would have been a yes. Ireland is very good at exporting its problems and its workforce talent. This week, the Minister for Health announced that abortion up to 12 weeks will be free in Ireland. This is huge. This is something a lot of us thought we would never see. But the legislation still won't be enacted until January, so as it stands, approximately 12 women a day continue to travel. Asylum seekers in direct provision, like Miss Y, who I mentioned earlier, were perhaps the minority most disproportionately affected by the 8th. They've no right to work or access to benefits and live off the equivalent of about €20 a week, getting permission to leave Ireland and then re-enter it is extremely time-consuming and complicated process. For them, getting the boat was simply never an option. And while free, safe, legal abortion is a huge step in the right direction in terms of reproductive rights for migrants in Ireland, it's still not really enough. The issues facing migrants and ethnic minorities in Ireland do not start and end with the 8th. Ireland has a woeful track record in terms of maternity support for migrants. 40% of maternal deaths in Ireland are migrant women, despite only making up 17% of the general population. And we also need to urgently end direct provision for there to be any real justice in Ireland. The polls on the referendum day were neck and neck right up until the last minute. People were on the fence. Many people were refusing to say what way they would vote, which is fair enough. We feared that the undecideds would swing it for the no, that people would panic. Trump was elected, Brexit happened. When people are under pressure, they stick with the status quo or they swing to the right. So many of us feared that we would wake up to an Ireland that had confirmed our worst fears. But all those undecideds were in fact yeses, quietly considered yeses, who would, perhaps like my mom, have been afraid of what the neighbours might say, but had in their own mind decided that it was time for a new Ireland. Up until recently, Ireland was an extremely Catholic country. In 1979, Pope John Paul visited, and 2.5 million people, basically half the country, attended. When Pope Francis visited in August, just gone by, 130,000 people turned up. They thought at least 500,000 would go, and it was just empty. This gives some indication of how the grip of the Catholic Church has loosened. Ireland has a very dark history when it comes to women's sexuality and reproductive rights, and repealing the 8th was, in effect, giving a massive two fingers to the Catholic Church. A massive weapon of the church were the Magdalene laundries, or mother and baby homes, where women who fell pregnant outside wedlock were whisked away and institutionalized, had their babies taken from them, sold off for adoption in the States, and were essentially made slaves to the state. The last Magdalene laundry in Ireland closed in 1996. A couple of years ago, the bones of nearly 800 babies were discovered in a mass grave in Galway. This prompted international outcry, and the story was covered by media worldwide. No one at home was particularly surprised. The bones were on the site of an old mother and baby home, where the children were routinely abused, worked to the bone, and died. Locals were aware of what had gone on there. I have 1 minute left. Thank you. Sorry. Don't worry. As a result, the Catholic Church's influence, because of the result of the Catholic Church's influence, we still have woeful sex education today. The 8th being repealed hopefully signifies the dawn of a new era where women's sexuality is no longer feared or punished. That it announces the era in which we teach young girls that contraception is empowerment and we teach boys about consent. Claire Daly, a brilliant TD from Independence for Change, made an impassioned speech in the Dáil the day after the 8th was repealed. She congratulated Irish politicians such as Leo Varadkar and Simon Harris on being on the right side of history. They were both very much basking in the glory of a victory they did quite little to bring about. She pointed out that she'd been tirelessly campaigning for the 8th for years, and that campaigning for abortion rights in Ireland had been like pushing a boulder up a hill, made all the more difficult by male politicians sitting on that boulder. It's more important than ever that the world learns from Ireland's decision to repeal the 8th. It's sometimes easy to take reproductive rights for granted, particularly in Britain. But with Brett Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court on this horizon, complete with sexual assault allegations, Brazil potentially electing a massively anti-choice, anti-women president, Argentina's Senate's decision to reject the bill on legalising abortion, abortion remaining illegal in Northern Ireland, it's more important than ever that the world follows the example of Ireland. We do have an openly gay Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, who the world tends to praise from afar and on social media. In fact, he's actually a right-wing snake, so I do think you have to be careful what you believe about Ireland. But we have learned from the 25th of May that if we organise, if we take to the streets, if we campaign tirelessly, that we can affect change. Last week there was massive protests about the housing crisis in Ireland, and I think there is a real appetite for change and a sense that we can make a difference, and that energy didn't quite exist before the repeal campaign. But we're also aware that legalising abortion is only the first step towards a fairer Ireland. We need sex education, we need housing rights, we need better maternity services, we need to end direct provision, and we need socialism. Repealing the 8th is only the beginning. Thank you.
That is what brave women look like, isn't it? Sitting on this stage. Thank you so much. I don't know about you guys, but that was actually really moving as well, and so incredible to have you here and sharing such a personal account. You know, we all think we're involved in political struggles, but how many of us have had to face that kind of hatred, you know, to defend the rights of women? So, can we have another round of applause, please, for Eva? It's amazing. Thank you. So, from Ireland, we go to Chile. We're going around the world with our Feminism Day. So, next we have Sofia Brito, who is the leader of the feminist student movement in Chile, the 8th of March organisation, and also part of an autonomous left party in Chile that she tried to tell me how to pronounce, but I was so useless that I'm going to leave it to her. So, please, a big round of applause for Sofia.
Thank you. My English is so awful, so if you don't understand something, then you can ask. I'm going to talk about what we called the feminist tide in Chile. We have a really huge feminist movement right now. May of this year will be remembered in the street of Chile as the beginning of that we can call the feminist tide. Thousands of female students occupied our universities and high schools to denounce diverse forms of sexual violence and power abuse occurring inside our educational spaces. Streets from all over the country were invaded by protesters demanding a non-sexist education. That is, an education which must put a definitive ending point to binary and dichotomic gender division and discrimination. However, the question is, where does this feminist breakout come from? The birth up of this strong movement is framed by the uprising of and rearticulation of feminism at local and global level. The huge demonstration of the movement called "Not Any Woman Less," that was the slogan against femicide in various countries of Latin America, The mass manifestation on last March 8th would gather millions of women across the continent and across the whole world. And the recent struggle of Argentinian feminists fighting for the right for free abortion, which widely transcended the borders of this country, are all of them significant expressions of fighting for female rights that preceded and nourished up our uprising in Chilean universities. Nevertheless, a quite important fact must not be lost of sight, namely that this feminist rising also occurs in the context of a strong intensification of neoliberal policies at global level and the new turns of conservative forces which already have taken place in different parts of the world. In Latin America, the current feminist movement raised up in the middle of the crisis of the so-called progressive cycle, and thereby in the middle of the ascent of the right-wing governments, subsequently the advance of the highly conservative social and political groups and organizations. In consonance with this global scenario, our mobilization is an heir of the social struggles that have been carried out as early as from the decade of the 80s, because the Chilean dictatorship served as a reference framework to political violence and restriction of human rights to make possible the most harsh, tough, and cruel implementations of neoliberal policies. This process brought with it as a natural matter the mercantilization of social rights, that is, privatizing the access to education, healthcare, housing, and basic assets as drinking water. As it well known, Chile was the country which served as an experimental social laboratory for the development of neoliberal transformations. The economical reforms implemented by the so-called Chicago Boys, Chilean followers of Milton Friedman's monetary theory, were crowned by a new state constitution, which, notwithstanding, is held running until today, in spite of the democratic governments that follow Pinochet regime. Thus, the Constitution holds up the juridical neoliberal framework, along with the strong conservative rerun upon women reproduction and the spoiling of female bodies. One of the anti-women laws promulgated by the dictatorship was the criminalization of the abortion. Only recently, last year, we have a restricted abortion act, only in 3 causes. However, the fall of the dictatorship and the transition to democracy did not mean women's liberation. The power of the feminist movement was shut by means of the fragmentation of its demands dissolved inside the National Women's Service and its gender policies. Despite a formal recognition and the instauration of a kind of share of quota policies, the female question began to be regarded as a part of a sectorial agenda separate from the other social movements. The feminist movement lost thereby part of its former power. The unholding of the neoliberal model brought about a growing entry of women into the formal labor market. Nevertheless, their incorporation to labor fields is typified by a categorization of female work as secondary. Moreover, given that the social forms of wage and salaried pay work are constituted by masculine logics linked to the patriarchal differentiation of roles between women and men, the incorporation of women to labor, mainly in the lower and the middle sectors, has implicated a kind of constant double negotiation between 2 logics. One of the reproductive work, homely, domestic, and related to taking care of family members, and the other of productive salaried paid work. Hand by hand, with the precariousness of female work, either as dependency of the capacity of getting loans through the access to formal work, and or the complementariness of the non-formal working hours, a harsh scenario of the protection configurates out. Although being this a scenario common to other sectors of working people, it becomes more radical in the case of women. A contradiction takes place. While the described dynamics exclude women from an inequalitarian participation in society, at the same time, different public discourses insistently convokes them into being part of it. Neoliberalism did not emancipate women from the underneath subaltern condition by making their labor tasks into a part of the dynamics of this political economic, but rather it changed the codes and language which describe the same underneath subaltern condition. Therefore, it is not an odd thing that it is precisely inside the educational spaces, as the places where labor force is trained, where the outbreak against the system is carried out. We have already seen the consequences of its expansion as merchandise in the framework of neoliberal modernizations, which disclose the underneath and subaltern characters of women's inclusion into education. As forms of opposition and resistance against this, protest manifestations, new organizational logics are being incubated and developed. New strength ideas have been elaborated, which it is worth to look upon more detail. Fighting for non-sexist education began conforming itself as demand that surpassed the particular cases of violence. The movements as Me Too, intending to conceptualize the very foundation of gender discrimination, as it is produced by means of general instruction, nurturing, training, and education at all levels, and thereby aiming to broaden the students' own demands, configuring a new perspective for public education as a whole. This is the reason why, far from reducing itself to a corporativist debate around particular demands, the limit to the interest of a specific sector, the female university student, while their struggle is gaining social legitimacy, are incorporating other problematics and questions that could lead to a widening of diverse discomfort expression. Thus, the possibility of questioning women's submission under sexual and labor abuse in university opens up the possibility of escalating the questioning and problematization up to abuse which is committed against women in the whole country and culture as a totality, especially the kind of abuse that linger and become realized in the dynamics of recent neoliberal modernizations, which is holding women under submission and subalternity in the logic of the system. Hence, the modalities which the potentialities of feminist mobilization are confronted with, especially when they must deal with market logics, cannot be resolved from the standpoint of purely punishment measurements, as for instance, greater penalties in the cases of sexual abuse, or palliative measurements as it is the case of the current policies. But what's required and needed is imagining, figuring out, and constructing second thoughts of reflections on the relationships between market and democracy. Above all, we need to rethink democracy as something more than the pure electoral representation, and therefore as something of greater draft and shaft than the equalization by means or quotas of this representation. Certainly, this is a more radical understanding of the notion of democracy and social power. The outbreak of feminist May set up the impugnation of gender discrimination as a public debate, and this impugnation has feminism as its horizon. Yet, still plenty of diverse interpretations. By the same token, debate put in question the real degrees of political representations and the characters and scope of the state's social policies. This is the matter that always has been passed over the governments of the transition. For this reason, it is impossible to separate the gender problem from the wider problem of the subsidiary character of the state, and thereby in a general context of restriction of democracy, from the necessity of rethinking the relationships between gender and social class, gender and social power, a process of theoretical elaboration which is inescapable for the forces in movement towards emancipation. But why then the relationship between feminism and political left is so complicated? Could the above described problems be understood as a specific matter separated from the working class? In Chile, as in all over the world, feminism has achieved to interpolate the transforming political forces for a better and greater democracy, updating the understanding of the struggles of the working class. A major contribution to these lines of thought has been made by theoreticians as Liz Vogel, Ciencia Rusa, and who is accompanying us in this forum, Tithi Bhattacharya, yields as the key conceptual instrument in order to understand, in her words, who a worker is and in what ways the worker can fight against the system. Most importantly, this theory helps us understand that any gains for gender rights that we make in either the formal economy or outside of it can only be temporary because the material basis of women's oppression is tied to the system as a whole. Any conversation about the end of the oppression and liberation does need to draw on a simultaneous conversation about the end of the system itself. This unitary comprehension of the different forms of oppression which are developed under capitalism allows us to understand the development of feminist struggles situated in their own historical context. Neglecting these facts has led us to two big mistakes in the contemporary left. One is to dismiss the concept of working class and replacing it by supposedly new revolutionary subjects, the working class broken apart from the real function that workers execute in the capitalist system through an illusory fragmentation, which is no other than the eschatological division generated by the neoliberalism. For instance, we can mention the idea that immigrants, students, indigenous people, females are all of them dissimilar subjects, and therefore their struggles are different and must be seen as isolated from each other. 1 minute more, please.
You come all the way from Chile, so
yeah.
I think we can,
Thank you. The second mistake was is the rejection coming particularly from the traditional left of those struggles. They are not necessarily upon salaries, not wanting to define themselves as anti-capitalist, and therewith their denial with respect to the construction of a socialist feminist that should be in condition to look upon and conceptualize the totality of the working class oppressions. The traditional left's wings phraseology around primary and secondary contradictions and saying like those are problems that we will resolve after the revolution comes are clear examples of an understanding of females as separate subjects of the working class. Notwithstanding, the working class is not a strength to the oppression occurring by race and gender discrimination. We are not workers in the first place, women in the other, and immigrant in the third place. Our body endured the totality, the wholeness of all kinds of oppression under capitalist structures. As Ciencia Rusa wisely points out, gender oppression brings out a powerful functional instrument for the division of working class, the genesis of hierarchies, and a powerful ideological control. On the other side, feminists as Silvia Federici illustrates how non-paid domestic labor, nurturing tasks as well as the indebtedness are assumed by the feminist bodies to nourish and take care of their families and do correspond to new forms of original capitalist accumulation. As for Chile, the feminist uprising has given the circulation among people of the concept feminism as an adjective characterizing something that all political organizations must take in charge. From some years ago until now, several political parties began to organize feminist fronts or feminist departments. All political streams have noticed the emergence of feminism as political factor, and they have tried to find in it a possibility for renovation gaining some legitimacy in a general context of discredit and crisis within context of political representation. They try to make advance of feminist policies. This is therefore that even from the extreme right wing to the left, like the party that I am part of, Frente Amplio, there are no groups that do not feel the need to refer to feminism, pronouncing themselves in favor of the feminist movements. And even more, they would declare themselves as feminists openly, yet with all conceptual and political accommodations and deformation that the notion of feminism can hold. There is a high probability that feminism would be used as a kind of superficial makeup in order to oxygenate all political parties, providing them with a more modern face, according to New York Times. Concretely, this can be translated as, for instance, into the fact that in the coming electoral processes and the advance could be made more women in the parties list, though without a significant alteration of the anti-democratic closures of traditional politics. But just for make a close, we need, as feminists, fight for a socialist feminism that could express itself as substantial policies and not as an aggregate to traditional politics. We have the power to articulate now the diverse struggles of a working class. So this is why we have to make a new kind of internationalism and stuff like that. So thank you.
Thank you so much for communicating such a strong kind of anti-capitalist feminism. I think we all know that feminism's been kind of co-opted by liberalism, and you articulated that so well. Also, just want to say, if I had to go to Chile and talk about neoliberalism in Spanish, I would have done a terrible job, and you were amazing. So thank you. Please give a round of applause again. Okay, so our next speaker is Elif Sarican, who is studying social anthropology at the LSE. She is also the Kurdistan Students' Union Coordinator and an activist of the Kurdish women's movement. So please give a big round of applause for Elif.
Thank you. It's certainly amazing to be here tonight, despite having 4 hours of sleep. But before I begin, I want to acknowledge and commemorate some of the revolutionary women who have sacrificed their lives and furthered our struggle to this point and have given us the motivation to keep on going. And I think most recently, and for me, I think personally, who has had perhaps one of the most personal and deepest impacts is someone called Anna Campbell. And Anna was 26 years old from Lewis, who decided to join the YPJ, the Women's Protection Unit, and insisted that she goes to Afrin during the Turkish invasion and resist and defend the women's revolution of Rojava. And she was unfortunately killed by a Turkish airstrike. And I just want to renew our promise to Anna that we will certainly keep fighting in her name. And, you know, Anna also went there taking from the legacy of, you know, many women that she had either met or read up on as well. And I know she was certainly affected by one of the founders of the Kurdish women's movement called Sakine Cansız, who was assassinated in Paris again by a Turkish intelligence agent, and Arin Mirkan, who turned her own body into a weapon to stop ISIS from further entering Kobane. And Barin Kobane, who in the resistance of Afrin, again, it was very brutally killed by the Turkish state, and her body mutilated and dragged across streets to try and make an example of her. And I mention these because, as I'm sure everyone will know, the resistance of women, the fight for the liberation of women has certainly not been an easy one, and it certainly won't be an easy one going forward. And, you know, I think most people who probably heard about the Kurdish movement or the Kurdish women's movement in this room would have probably heard them through the resistance of Kobane and the way they were painted in the media as these, you know, beautiful women with guns and fighting against ISIS. Now, yes, they are beautiful, but that's not the point, you know. They had something that they were fighting for, and as usual, you know, the liberal media completely sidelined that, and actually most of the time didn't even mention that. And that's what I want to speak a little bit about today, is the motivation behind these heroic women. And I certainly feel like it's a privilege that I get to speak about this as you know, a Kurdish woman who grew up in London and has never had the opportunity to resist the way those women have resisted on the front lines, whether it's in war or front lines of struggle, but have really given me the inspiration to try and lead a meaningful life. And the principles, the main principles of the Kurdish women's movement is that to fight for women's liberation, you certainly must be anti-capitalist, anti-colonial, anti-racist, anti-fascist, and anti-nation state. Now, if we are not all of these, it's not a meaningful fight for women's liberation, and therefore a meaningful fight against patriarchy. And the analysis is that 5,000 years of human civilization is essentially the history of patriarchy, and therefore the history of the enslavement of women. And through the analysis of the Kurdish people's leader, Abdullah Öcalan, we understand that women are, in the Kurdish women's movement, women are accepted as the first colony. And so therefore, our struggle is essentially a fight against colonialism, against us and against our own bodies and against our political will and against the effects of it in every single area of our lives. And therefore, you know, the idea of women and war and women and resistance, but in resistance too, is really important to not only acknowledge, but also try and understand. And, you know, I'm not going to get into the history of women and war and, of course, the effects of war on women and how certainly women's bodies have been used as tools in wars historically, because, you know, I think, one, we probably all have an idea of that, and two, we don't have much time right now. But I think women in resistance is really important because in potentially every single revolutionary situation or revolution historically, women have played a crucial and, if not essential role. But in most instances, after the revolution, the position of women in society has either been the same or worse than before the revolution. And this is exactly where the Kurdish women's movement comes in, I think, is that how do we, while the revolution is happening, make sure we institutionalize women's liberation, that it's not a situation or an issue to deal with after the revolution, but it's the exact center of what the revolution is trying to achieve. And again, Abdullah Öcalan says that a society can never be free without women's liberation, which means nothing else will be set in stone or will be meaningful or genuine unless your starting point is women's liberation and therefore gender equality. And I think there's practical ways we've seen this in Rojava, but also, you know, there's theory and ideology behind the Kurdish women's movement I think that is important to acknowledge as well. And it's really difficult to talk about a revolution and a struggle and a resistance that is ongoing without talking about current political climate. So I'm going to try and balance that without going on too much, but I feel like I wouldn't be meaningfully representing what's happening without talking about the now as well. But I think one of the most remarkable things that has happened in the last few years is that in 2014, when ISIS sieged the Sinjar mountains and kidnapped thousands of Yazidi women and were selling them as sex slaves, especially in Raqqa, what they declared as their capital. And then when the liberation of Raqqa and the operation was being organized, Yazidi women organized self-defense forces to then liberate Raqqa, and that's exactly what happened. In October 2017, it was Yazidi women who liberated Raqqa from the shackles of ISIS and saved their Yazidi sisters. And unfortunately, there's still many missing women, but I think that was one of the most inspiring practical instances that happened, especially in Syria. And I think this has only been possible, one, because this doesn't happen overnight, as many people, I'm sure will agree. There's a 40-year history to this movement and essentially the preparation of preparing for a revolutionary instance to be able to institutionalize what's happening. And the institutionalization is happening through, first and foremost, what we call direct democracy. So the most important level of society is the very ground level, and that's the communes. And society, it works its way up to neighborhood assemblies, to city assemblies, and then the canton assembly, what we call the canton assemblies, and then now there's the Democratic Federation of Northern Syria. So there's a 40% quota in every level of administration that must be women. And I think now actually, at the moment, it's voluntarily, a lot of assemblies are actually majority women at the moment. And there's a co-chair system, so every level of administration must have a man and a woman. And alongside every again, level of administration, there's autonomous women's structures that have veto power over any decision that is made about women, which I suppose can be every decision, right? And so I think, therefore, coming back to what's happening now and the continuation of the invasion of Afrin by the fascist Turkish state, it's important to understand that not just the Turkish state, its allies, NATO and international nation states, their wars against what Afrin is a war against a women's revolution and therefore women. And it's because it's a war against the direct democracy, the ecology, the cooperative economy that is being built there. And all of this is somehow seen as an existential threat against the power that certain international actors have had, or the influence they've had in the Middle East. And so we don't have much time left, but I just want to read a short message that the Kurdish women's movement had released for the anniversary of the Rojava Revolution, and I'll just end with that. We may be the children of the lands of Ahmed and Jizire, Dersim and Jolamerg. We may be the hearts of the land spanning out from Kobane to Kamishlo, Halepje, Hewler to Slemani, and the skirts of the Zagros mountains. We may be the daughters of the sun, children of Kurdistan. However, we carry the fight of women across the world. Thousands of us don't only fight ISIS. We carry on our shoulders the ideological weight of those stoned in Afghanistan or genitally mutilated in Somalia. The women who are sexually enslaved across the world, discriminated, paid less, not represented, forcibly married, abused, and victimized by domestic rape. We are here to empower women, break patriarchy, represent the silent. The sacrifices of the Kurdish women are for all of you. We are here to stay and to set precedent for the world. Embrace the revolution. Rojava is your home.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for a really, really inspiring talk. And like everyone on the panel, just demonstrates the sacrifice that women have really made for the cause of other women. So we are going next across the pond to Nelini Stamp. You've got a few issues, haven't you, in America at the moment when it comes to things around gender, quite public ones. So Nelini is the National Organising Director at the Working Families Party. She works with volunteer leaders across the country to find, recruit and train and win grassroots campaigns. Nelini has been deeply involved in social movement work around economic and racial justice across the country. She was an occupier at Occupy Wall Street to help bridge the gap between Labour, community-based organisations and Occupy activists. So please can we give a really warm welcome to Nelini.
Thank you, and I'm gonna time myself so that you don't have to. All right, so in my tradition of, in the States, I come from Black Southern organizing tradition, even though I'm from New York, so I have to open up with a song real quick. So people can just tap their feet. I went down to the rich man's house and I took back what he stole from me. Took back my dignity. Took back my humanity. Now it's under my feet, under my feet, under my feet, under my feet. Ain't gonna let the system walk all over me. All right, cool. So, sorry, oh, thank you. So the US is a perfect country. I'm just kidding. So I'm from Brooklyn. I talk really fast. I say things like coffee and movies, so excuse me. I'm gonna just start with just the idea that I have a question. If we took out the windows of the Blackie, would the Blackie still exist as a structure? Yeah? Okay. I hope so. That'd be kind of weird. All right. So if we strip the windows stay. If we strip the floor out of the Blackie, would the structure still be up? Yeah. Okay, cool. So, metaphor's coming. For me, I do not see a world in which we have socialism without destroying patriarchy, white supremacy, right, and capitalism. I don't see a world where we have, a complete and equitable gender non-conforming, a trans-inclusive society unless we destroy capitalism and white supremacy. You get what I mean, right? So the building can still exist if you take out the windows. The building can exist if you take out the floor, but we need to destroy the house and build another one. And so that's just how I live. And I live because it's just who I am. In the last kind of 72 hours, everything is on fire in the United States, but compared to what my ancestors had to go through, especially those ancestors that came from Puerto Rico and Belize, which used to be British Honduras, which was a colony of you all. And so my dad always taught me God Save the Queen, and I was like, why? It's totally fine. So in the last couple of hours, literally the last 24 hours, I don't know, because I have had 2 hours of sleep. So I feel you on the light sleep, but there was this hashtag called Why I Didn't Report. And to me, it shows the intersections of being an Afro-Latina living in the United States. So Dr. Christine Blasey Ford has come out and said that Brett Kavanaugh, who is the Supreme Court pick of the United States right now by President Trump, has sexually assaulted her at a high school party years ago. And Trump, of course, because he's an asshole, excuse my language, and the devil, literally said, well, why she didn't report it. And it made me think about why I didn't report my sexual assault when it happened to me when I was 19 years old. Well, a couple things. One is that I never went to college. I'm a high school dropout. I have this thing called my GED. It's good enough degree. I couldn't afford to go to college because, you know, we got to pay for this shit in the United States. I curse a lot too, so sorry. And so when I had my sexual assault, one, I was drunk, taken into a bathroom, gonna spare everybody the details. And my friends were like, oh, you were drunk, nothing happened, right? Like, you're fine. So my own friend said that. Being a black woman in the United States of America, there was no way I was gonna call the police because I've seen them execute and be trial, judge, and jury in the streets, especially in New York, where we have the largest, police body. I'm gonna go over this time. See, I knew that was gonna happen. But I said 8 minutes, so you know. Fundamentally, I wasn't gonna call a police that I didn't trust. I wasn't gonna say that who I was or they judging my character. I'm a high school dropout. At that time, I didn't even have my high school degree. I'm drinking at a club I shouldn't be drinking at because I'm not 21 yet, because it's 21, I know, poor us. And I don't really fully remember. It took me actually 5 years to fully remember the details of that night. And so I say that to you because I cannot live in a world where we say that socialism is going to solve everything unless we fundamentally destroy the very ist and isms that have created our society. Gender, racism, and capitalism are all intertwined. This is not an identity, identity politics destroys everything else, like bullshit. There is a level that people have gone too far on identity. However, these systems need each other. They balance on each other, they feed upon each other. And unless we begin to destroy them all, we will not get far. We see this in the United States, we call it white feminism, right? Goes back to the suffragette movement. White women got the right to vote in 1918. Yeah. 1919 in the United States. Oh God, see, I didn't go to college. But black women didn't get the right to vote to 1968. 50 years of change because black people didn't have the right to vote. So we have to always understand those intersections when we are struggling and fighting our work. The work that we do at the Working Families Party understands that if we don't look through the whole picture, we're only gonna get a piece of the pie. And the reason why Trump is president of the United States, vomit every time. The reason why he's in this position is because he decided to lean on this deep divide that class versus everything else is a thing. He said, oh, the workers of the United States, I feel you, I'm with you. But you know, immigrants rape people. That's what he said. That's what he actually said. And what we see globally, we see the people using folks' economic insecurity and their fears. And are they blaming it on? Women, LGBTQ folks, trans women of color that get murdered at the highest rate still in the US. We're blaming it on immigrants when really we should be blaming it on, climate change that's forcing people to migrate country to country, and we should be blaming it on the war on drugs, and we should be blaming it on imperialism. We're blaming it because it's the haves and the have-nots. So the reason why I say this, and I'm just kind of lecturing you all now, so I'm really sorry. I'm trying to get to a point, is that, it reflects in our day-to-day lives. It reflects in the fact that, I help women run for office in the United States. We train, recruit, we train people to run campaigns too, because they can't just be running for office. But 80% of the members of Congress, of the US Congress, are men in the United States. 80% What? Of course we have the laws that we do. Of course we have, actual men saying that it's okay if this woman gets raped. That's why Clarence Thomas got elected. This is not something new. This happened, see, okay, right, 1 minute. This happened years ago when Anita Hill testified in front of Clarence Thomas, that she was sexually assaulted in her workplace. They have this whole thing with the can, pubic hair in a can. Go look it up or watch the movie. It's a really good one on HBO. Thank you, Kerry Washington. And so this is a vicious cycle that's going to continue until we get to the root of this problem. Because at least in the US, we're seeing the spectrum go back and forth. This isn't, everybody's like, yes, the level of, because Trump's an actual idiot in a lot of ways, and he's smart in a lot of media savvy ways, but the level has risen. But again, it's nothing like what our ancestors went through, lynching in the streets. My ancestors in Puerto Rico couldn't even fly our flag. Our flag was illegal in the US. Like the flag of Puerto Ricans was illegal in the United States for a long time. So I'm not going through anything that level of what my grandparents went through, what my ancestors went through. And still, we're swinging back and forth on this pendulum where we continue to go neoliberal, far right, neoliberal, far right. And the neoliberal gets more neoliberal if there's even a way. And the far right gets more outlandish, racist, patriarchal, and it sets a new norm every single time, right? People forget that Make America Great Again was Reagan's campaign slogan in 1980. Ain't nothing new. So, with a bit of hope, I fundamentally believe that we need to have more conversations like this, uplifting women. I think that if you're not following a woman of color in your movement spaces, got to reevaluate who you following, to be honest, because it's time to follow women of color. It's about goddamn time, globally, that we follow women of color. And I think that we really need to have these conversations within our communities, in our movement spaces, and strategize how we fundamentally, I mean, I want to get to the level where, you know, the Kurdish women's movement is at, where it is, you have that intersection. And if you ain't one of those, bye-bye. Like, you can't sit with us type shit. And I think that we can get there. And I will say the last couple of things, you know, the Me Too movement was started 10 years ago by Tarana Burke, a black woman in Harlem. Big ups in New York. And the reason why I say that is because we need to trust. We need to trust in women, follow women, be inclusive, because I see this here and I want to be acknowledgeable that there are no trans women on the stage. I believe so. And making sure that we uplift the struggles. And we need to find strategies in a ways that intersectionality isn't just a term that we throw out, but it's the everyday practice in which we live our organizing lives. Because when we do that, we will win. Thank you.
Put it out there. That was like the best start to a speech ever, and all the sort of like awkward Britishness and us going, oh, I quite like this. Yeah, this is actually really good. Yeah. You brought some American to Liverpool, so thank you. It's fantastic. So we go to our final speaker, to Tithi Bhattacharya. Did I get it right? Yes. Okay. Who is Associate Professor and Director of Global Studies at Purdue University. She is the author of The Centennials of Culture, Class, Education and the Colonial Intellectual in Bengal, and the editor of Mapping Social Reproduction Theory. She's also one of the main organisers of the International Women's Strike in the United States. I'm going to make a special plea to try and keep to 10 minutes if you can. So please, can we have a massive round of applause for Tithi?
Thanks, Holly. And thank you very much to the organizers of Momentum for inviting me on this fabulous panel and giving me the best political gift of being able to share the stories with comrades here on the stage. It's like Diwali and Eid and birthday all come together. So this is just fantastic. So I'm going to talk about, since it's feminism of the many, I'm going to talk about the politics of feminism for the many. Because all of us and the stories we've heard so far, which are so incredible, are really a case to be made for feminism. There's no question about that. And in the stories that we heard, there is a case to be made for feminism for the many, not for the few. If we take abortion, for instance, from the stories we heard from Ireland and Chile, I mean, place that in the United States. I had my first abortion when I was in India, and it was public and open, and I just went to a hospital and got an abortion. In order to have an abortion in the United States late last year, I could not get one in the state that I was in. I had to drive 6 hours to a different state to get an abortion. I was asked to wait several hours in order to get it. It was expensive. And I had to walk through a gauntlet of pro-life, who I basically called forced birthers, in order to get inside the Planned Parenthood facility where abortion is provided. And for those of you who don't know the history of abortion in the United States, it's twofold. One is that Planned Parenthood services are mostly accessed by working class women and women of color. 80% of Planned Parenthood's services are accessed by working class women and women of color. But also, United States has the glorious history of actual stopping people. So this is about forcing women to give birth, but also for women of color, particularly Puerto Rican women, there's the brilliant history the United States has of actual sterilization of these women. So the access to bodies operate in two ways, and so we can see that the politics of how to stop that is very, very important. Because, I mean, to go back to Planned Parenthood, you know, when it comes to the anti-choice, anti-abortion activists, Planned Parenthood actually, we had a big debate nationally with the International Women's Strike and some comrades in Planned Parenthood, because Planned Parenthood said it's okay for the bigots to be actually in front of the clinic. And we said, no, we need to confront the bigots in order for women to have safe access into the facility. We need to confront them. And Planned Parenthood said, no, this is not, I mean, not everyone in Planned Parenthood, because we had very, very good comrades in Planned Parenthood who backed us. But many people in Planned Parenthood said that, you know, no, we should just let, you know, both sides of the debate and etc. Actually, that does not work. So I think it's very important. I want to go back to it and talk about why the politics of feminism for the many is particularly important. In the spring of this year, Facebook CEO Sheryl Sandberg told the world that, and I quote, "We would be a lot better off in half of all countries and companies if half of all countries and companies were run by women, and half of all homes were run by men, and we shouldn't be satisfied until we reach that goal," unquote. A leading exponent of corporate feminism, Sandberg had already made a name and a buck for herself by urging women managers to lean in at the company boardroom. Having previously served as Chief of Staff to US Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, the man who deregulated Wall Street, she had no qualms about counseling women that success won through toughness in the business world was the royal road to gender equality. The same spring of this year, on March 8th, a militant feminist strike, Huelga Feminista, shut down Spain. The organizers, part of the Global International Women's Strike Network, called for, and I quote them now, "a society free of sexist oppression, exploitation, and violence, for rebellion and a struggle against the alliance of the patriarchy and capitalism that want us to be obedient, submissive, and quiet," unquote. They announced that they would not accept worse working conditions nor being paid less than men for the same work. That is why they claimed they were calling a work strike. On that day, more than 5 million people in Spain marched and struck. As the sun set over Madrid and Barcelona, Catalan and Spanish feminists announced to the world, "On March 8th, we crossed our arms, interrupted all productive and reproductive activity." These two voices represent opposing paths for the feminist movement. The Spanish feminists who led the strike and the CEO Sandberg. Sandberg and her class see feminism as a handmaiden of capitalism. They want a world where the task of managing exploitation in the workplace and oppression in society is shared equally by ruling class men and women. This is a remarkable vision of equal opportunity domination, one that asks ordinary men and women in the name of feminism to be grateful that their boss or imperial master, the person who ordered the drones to kill their parent or who put their child in a cage at the border, is a woman, not a man. In sharp contrast, the organizers of the Huelga Feminista are calling for an end to capitalism, an end to the system that generates the boss, produces national borders, and manufactures the drone to guard them. Faced with these two visions of feminism, we find ourselves at a fork in the road, but the choice we face is anything but ordinary. One path leads to a scorched planet where human life is immiserated to the point of unrecognizability, if indeed it remains possible at all. The other points to the sort of world that has always figured centrally in humanity's most exalted dreams, a just world whose wealth and natural resources are shared by all, where equality and freedom are a premise, not an aspiration. The contrast could not be starker, but what makes the choice pressing for us now is the disappearance of any middle way. Okay.
Hello?
We owe that condition to neoliberalism, the exceptionally predatory form of capitalism that has held sway across the globe for the last 40 years, having poisoned the atmosphere, mocked every pretense of democratic rule, stretched our social capacities to the breaking point, and worsened living conditions generally for the vast majority. Capitalism has raised the stakes for every social struggle, turning sober efforts to win modest reforms into pitched battles for survival. In these conditions, the time for fence-sitting is past. Feminists, like everyone else, must take a stand. Will we continue to pursue equal opportunity domination while the planet burns, or will we reimagine gender justice in an anti-capitalist form which leads beyond the present carnage to a new society? Feminist for the Many is a brief for the second path, which we deem both necessary and feasible. What makes an anti-capitalist feminism thinkable today is the political strand of the present crisis, the collapse of elite credibility throughout the world. The casualties include not only the center-left and center-right parties that promoted neoliberalism, now despise remnants of their former self, but also the Sandberg-style corporate feminist allies whose progressive veneer has lost its shine. Increasingly recognized as a ruling class scam, this feminism met its fate in the US presidential election of 2016, when the much ballyhooed candidacy of Hillary Clinton failed to elicit the expected enthusiasm amongst women voters, and for good reason. The candidate embodied the disconnect between elite women's representation in elected institutions and improvements in the lives of the vast majority. Clinton's defeat is our wake-up call, in the United States anyway, exposing the bankruptcy of liberal feminism. It represents a historic opening that cries out for a challenge from the left. In the current vacuum of liberal hegemony, we have the chance to build another feminism, a feminism with a different definition of what counts as a feminist issue, a different class orientation, and a different radical transformative ethos. Feminist internationalism, the way that these comrades here have been talking about and actually enacting, is our effort to promote that other feminism. We are here not in order to sketch an imagined utopia, but to clarify the road that must be traveled in order to reach a real one. We must explain why feminists and all social movements should choose the second path of the feminist strikes and the feminist mass mobilizations like in Argentina, Ireland, and Chile. Why we must unite with other anti-capitalist and anti-systemic movements, why our movement must become what in the United States we've called a feminism for the 99%. Only in this way, by connecting with anti-racists, environmentalists, labor and migrants' rights activists, can feminism rise to the challenge of our times. By decisively rejecting the path of lean in and the feminism of the 1%, our feminism can become a beacon of hope for everyone else. What gives us courage to embark on this project now are the first stirrings of a new wave of an international feminist movement, as you can see from the panel here. Not the corporate feminism that has proved so disastrous for working women and is now hemorrhaging all credibility, nor the microcredit feminism that claims to empower women of the South by lending them tiny sums of money while really serving as an alibi for neoliberalization. No, what gives us hope are the international feminist and women's strikes of 2017, 2018. It is these strikes and the increasingly coordinated movements that are developing around them that first inspired and now embody what we call feminism for the 99%. The movement started in Poland in October of 2016 when masses of women went on strike to oppose that country's ban on abortion. Later that month, it crossed the ocean to Argentina, where striking women met the heinous murder of Lucia Perez with the militant cry, "Ni una menos." Soon it spread to Italy, Spain, Brazil, Turkey, Peru, the United States, Mexico, Chile, and dozens of other countries. Having begun in the streets, it surged through workplaces and schools and eventually engulfed the high-flying worlds of show business and media and politics and IT. For the last 2 years, its slogans have resonated powerfully across the globe. Nostras paramos, we strike. We have comrades from the UK women's strike here, Vivas nos queremos, Ni una menos, and of course feminism for the 99%. At first a ripple, and now it has the potential to disrupt existing alliances and change the game. What turned a series of nationally based actions into a transnational movement was the decision to strike together on March 8, 2017. With that bold stroke, this new form of feminist activism has repoliticized International Women's Day, returning to its all but forgotten historical roots in working class and socialist feminism, brushing aside the tacky baubles of depoliticization, the branches, mimosas, and hallmark cards that have covered over the real roots of March 8th, this movement recalls the day in 1908 when a mass strike of immigrant garment workers in New York broke out in Manhattan, prompting German socialists Louise Zietz and Clara Zetkin to call for International Working Women's Day. Embodying that militant spirit, the feminist strikes of today are reclaiming our history, uniting women separated by oceans, mountains, and continents, as well as by borders, barbed wire fences, and walls. They give new meaning to the slogan, "Solidarity is our weapon." But this is not all. The movement has invented new ways to strike while infusing the strike form itself with a new kind of politics. As a result, this new feminist wave has the potential to overcome the stubborn and divisive opposition between identity politics and class politics. Disclosing the unity of workplace and social life, it refuses to limit class struggle to one of those spaces. Redefining what counts as work and who counts as a worker, it rejects capitalism's structural undervaluation of women's labor, both paid and unpaid. And we know how this has worked out recently in countries such as Argentina and Chile. All told, the new wave of militant feminist activism is a far cry from the corporate liberal feminism that has predominated in recent decades. This movement is rediscovering the idea of the impossible, demanding both bread and roses. The bread that decades of neoliberalism has taken from our tables, but also the beauty that nourishes our spirit through the exhilaration of rebellion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I feel quite moved, actually. I don't know about anyone else. It's been a really powerful set of talks, and we've got about 15 minutes now for some discussion. You can ask questions to the panel, though we don't have much time to come back to the panel, but please do feel free to make statements and ask questions, and if there is something that's really directed at any of our speakers, then I'll try to give them time to do so. Also, can we just make sure, as in all of our sessions at TWT, we keep our conversations comradely and have some kind of healthy debate. So, there is a lady here at the front, and I've got a TWT. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, yeah, there you go. So, lady there, thank you.
Thank you so much for this. I was booked in for the Labour Women's Conference, which I've attended several times before. And there's a measure of guilt in not attending. And I am so pleased that I chose the events today at the World Transformed, right? And the question of women and neoliberalism is absolutely crucial within the Labour Party and is part of my discontent. When the leadership of the Labour Party came up, I had to vote for an older white male with a beard. I could not vote for the two women who were standing because these were neoliberal. They were just offering, like Clinton, more of the same. We have a problem in Liverpool. We have lots of women councillors, and we also have MPs who are not anti-austerity and who are neoliberal. And this is a real problem because there's a disconnect between the solidarity in Labour communities and those who are meant to be representing us and who are quite anxious about their jobs. So I just want to thank you, all of you, for... I've got a badge in the hall which I can no longer wear, which says "Trust Women," and that feels sad. But that's how it's come about. Because, as Nancy Fraser, the philosopher, said, women have started to deliver neoliberalism, and that is absolutely not what feminism is about. They do not understand the incompatibility of feminism and neoliberalism. You cannot believe in both. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there another TWT volunteer that can take the mic? Did you put your hand? No. Sorry, I just thought we do two at the same time. In fact, could you take that mic to the lady there? Yes, thank you, go ahead. And please, if you can keep contributions to 1 minute, that would be fantastic, thank you. Yeah.
I was just wondering if maybe someone would like to address this rising resignation syndrome and compassion fatigue out of middle-class, gentrified demographic where they're just refusing to acknowledge privilege and actually shutting down voices. And for those like communist anarchists and activists like myself, I'm beginning to get incredibly frustrated with this and how do I keep my own motivation in this situation?
Okay, thank you. Is that working, that microphone? Yes, it is. No, it's not working. Now it's coming. The working one.
Hello? Yes. Wow. Okay, hello, thank you very, very, very much. I don't have questions as well. I think you have probably, all of you, thought very carefully about what you have been telling us. So thank you very much for your work, for your lives, for being women as I am, as we are. I would like to share 3 small things with you. The first thing is with respect to the last comment, no, the lady from Liverpool comment, and what has been said by, sorry for the pronunciation, Tithi Bhattacharya, I guess, sorry. With respect to the divide, I would say, between neoliberal feminism and feminism to core. And I would reconnect this with my short second and third points. The point being the difference between equality and justice. Neoliberal feminism is fishing for an empty equality that doesn't comment, doesn't criticize in any way the building, the bones of the example that the other activist, sorry, I don't remember the name, Nelini, I think, yes, has done before. And I think this is what we should fish for. We have to fish for justice in all its nuances. That's why we should be connected internationally. I'm Italian, for example, but we are talking about discretionality. We are talking about changing definitions. We are talking about discussing identity in women identities and its definition continuously. So we are not talking about equality, we are talking about justice. This is the first point I wanted to make in reference with the difference between... Can I ask you just to make
just that one point? Sorry, because there's other people who want to speak.
Yeah, very fast. Okay. The second point, which
I'm obviously not being strong enough, am I?
No.
I need to just...
Thank you. Thank you, but I will be very fast.
Yeah, please put your hand up if you are waiting as well, so I can come
back to you. Second and third point together, then. It's this image. I'm Italian again, and there is an image that I would like to share with you because reconnects most of the comments you have been doing. Is the image of this young lady. She's 22 years old. She's from Cameroon. She has been, she's a refugee. She has been found in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. She has been violated many times in Libya and throughout Africa. And she has been condemned by the media in my country and at European level because after having been rescued in the open sea, some volunteer put nail color on her nails. So she has been judged like a loose woman, like a bitch, and all of this. So this is just an example, an image I would like to share with you to reconnect like the emptiness and the populism and the nationalism we are going through is deeply connected with how we have to care about it. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you. Jumper, and if there's anyone else who would like to speak so that I can kind of point the direction. So the... got a big voice, then yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So I'm a civil engineering student, and I spent the summer working in an engineering consultancy in a war department. And I just wanted to say that there's so much in the engineering world. You know, I was the only person of color. I was only female in an office of 40. In an energy, water, materials, structures department. And I wanted to mention that there was an article in The Guardian about what would cities look like if mothers designed them. You know, and that's just like an incredible idea, and especially what you were saying about the like capitalist, feminist, like that's just an oxymoron, you can't do that. But yeah, just kind of what the world would look like if more women were in positions where we were influencing how our infrastructure is built, how our societies are built, just as a whole, not just about... And it's interesting, especially being an engineer, no one talks about politics in engineering, and engineering is politics, and, you know, but yeah, I just wanted to say, but yeah, and thank you, you're all great.
Thank you very much, thank you. There is a lady there with the glasses at the back, and then we'll go to you next.
Hi, my name's Camille. I'm from the Women's Strike Assembly here in the UK, and I just wanted to talk a bit about some of the thinking that we've been doing in the UK about not getting fixated on just one date in which we're rebellious, obviously being International Women's Day, and the day of now reoccurring women's strikes. And we've been really thinking about the kind of political and industrial strategy of women's work, both inside and outside of the home. And one campaign that we've launched recently, and it definitely relates to a politics of the many, is around the decriminalisation of sex work here in the United Kingdom. And it was just an issue that hadn't quite come up on the panel. So I thought it was necessary to kind of think about the kinds of women who don't get to really inhabit and feel secure within feminism yet. And that's certainly one battle that a feminism for the many needs to get its head around, and the Labour Party in general needs to get its head around and adopt a decriminalisation of sex work policy. Thanks.
There's a man there with his hand up. And is there anyone else who also would like to speak?
Thank you. I just thought I'd be the token guy to say something, just for fun. No, but I'm very grateful to hear people speaking, and very much agree with the lady's comment there about if more women were in power, the world would be a better place. And you see it in Uganda, which is where my dad's from. You actually see microcredit doing pretty well there because women are getting the money more than the men getting the money. I'm going to say something half unpopular, which I think is, I think you've got to split up feminism from neoliberalism. When I hear neoliberalism, it's just a catch-all word, and it's not specific. And I think it turns some people off because they don't know what it... Pardon? Yeah, but you've got to understand that the fight is to bring everyone in and to bring everyone and make sure they all come on the journey with you. The second is...
I'm going to, sorry, just go to the lady here. And I will make sure that someone comes back to your point, though, from the stage properly. So there is a lady here at the front with the scarf.
Where? I've missed it. Where? Cool.
Hi there, thank you, everybody. I'm a little emotional because I did get emotional like you. And this is not a provocation. It's literally like a question that I put out to you. So these are wonderful events. But time and again, when I walk in the room where the topic is feminism, there are rooms full of women. And so if we have to pursue our intersectional agendas, how can we stretch this intersectionalism to include non-women? Because if feminism is attached to many other qualities and forms of inequality, then can we get them in the room? Can we get the non-women in the room and fight with us? Do we need token non-women? Can we have them all and fight with us? Because this is true solidarity. How do we do this? This is literally a practical question. How do we get everybody in the room? Because being feminist is part of being a woman, but it's not just being a woman. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak? All right, Tithi, do you want to come back to those last 2 points particularly? And then, yeah, you were sort of like nodding, so I was like, yeah, you set yourself up, yeah. And then if anyone else wants to ask a question, then. So, do we need to talk about neoliberalism and how do we get more men in the room?
How do we get more men in the room? Okay, so I don't have a very, I love the question because this is a question I think that cannot be solved in panels like this. It has to be solved on the street within struggles, right? So I think that would be my first easy answer to that. But I also think that in these kind of movements, not just in feminist movements, but in movements in general, I think it is important that women and non-binary people actually get a chance to shape the agenda of the movement, okay? So because, I mean, this is another point about the feminism for the 99% or feminism for the many, that it is not just, abortion struggle is not just a feminist struggle, okay? I think wage struggle is a feminist struggle. I think police violence struggle is a feminist struggle. I think housing struggle is a feminist struggle, okay? So the point is not just that men be part of a feminist room. The point is that feminism as a politics be actually the seed of all the other struggles, and our politics get to shape the agenda of those struggles, right? So that's the way I think the International Feminist Strike is trying to conceive of it, because we are very open that men should be part of International Women's Day activism, okay? And we saw that amazing thing in Ireland where there were so many men coming out in the streets, and you're absolutely right, it has to be together. But the point is that it is not, they don't come as allies. They should come because they should know that their liberation is tied with ours. Okay, it is not a moral question.
Yeah, there was a comment earlier about justice, and I think a lot of folks say justice, and for the particular perspective of the Americas, I actually don't even think we can get justice unless there's repair, and that comes in the form of reparations. The UK, Spain, Italy, the Netherlands, France, if we don't get actually past, because there is not even equality, there's not even equity unless the Americas and the global South are repaired for what colonialism has done to our land, to our indigenous people, to our black folks. So.
I think that's a really important question, and I just want to say something quickly, building on what the comrades have already said. And the Kurdish women's movement, and so therefore the women's liberation ideology of the Kurdish movement was formulated by Abdullah Öcalan, who's a man. So, and the reason why I mention this is that I think in the Kurdish women's movement, we have been very, I don't want to call it lucky, but we have many male comrades who are genuine allies. But at the same time, the women over the last 40 years have fought relentlessly, more internally than against the external enemy, to get to this point. And if patriarchy is 5,000 years old and 5,000 years deep, then we obviously have a long way to go, and nothing is certainly going to happen overnight. But just something practically, in Rojava, some of the ways that these questions are they attempt to tackle them is, for example, in the self-defense units, before any man or woman is given any arms, they have to receive women's liberation education. So they have to, and at any level of society, the most basic academy level, you have to receive women's liberation education, which is you are given education about 5,000 years of patriarchy, the Neolithic era to obviously the state system, the nation state, colonialism, capitalism, the nation state, neoliberalism. And how a solution practically, but also theoretically looks for that. I mean, theoretically looks, yeah.
Thank you so much, and we have run out of time, so we're not going to go back to our last two speakers, but thank you so much for everyone on the panel. It's been a really extraordinary and really personal, actually, I think, panel this evening, which I think, for me, certainly, has been incredibly moving, but also incredibly empowering. So there is no socialism without feminism, but there's also no socialism without parties. And I don't mean political parties, I mean like beer and dancing and that kind of thing. So right now, or in 15 minutes' time at Constellations, the World Transformed Party is beginning, so please come, have a drink, have a dance, continue these conversations with us, and enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you very much.